I'm your host and MC, James Ross, and this is Quantum Leopard. This episode, we have the wonderful Catriona Dowden. This set was recorded on the 10th of February 2024 by Aniruddh Ojha at Bold. Aniruddh also did the editing, and the interview took place on the 15th of December 2025. Content warnings on the interview for vaginismus. Enjoy!
My name's Catriona, and I didn't get bullied that much in school. Proportionate to my personality. Like, to give you an idea of the kind of teenager that I was, I had not one, but two Radio 4 themed birthday parties. And at another of my birthday parties, we played a game of my own invention called Pin the Facial Hair to the Philosopher. Because I've always sort of thought that birthday parties are an opportunity to impose organised fun on all of your friends and acquaintances. I'm not a huge fan of spontaneous fun, and I've got some graphs to explain why. That's the most enthusiasm the graphs have ever received. Keep that going. So I don't know if everyone can see those. If you can't, they are really just for me. But this one here is spontaneous fun. So it's plotted according to intensity and duration. So what you can see there is it's quite intense, but it just sort of happens and then it's over. This is graph number 2. It's organised fun. So what's happening here is it's not quite as high on the intensity axis, but it has more components. It's got 4 components, so we'll talk through those now. So firstly, planning the fun. Secondly, anticipating the fun. Executing the fun. And then finally, congratulating yourself on the fun well planned and executed. I think they're quite versatile graphs as well. They also work for this one as heterosexual sex. And then graph number 2 is lesbian sex. I didn't really like having my photograph taken, and I was wondering why that was, and I think it might be to do with growing up in the advent of social media and a very image-obsessed culture. But I think it might be partly that. I think it's mostly the fact that I really worry about that thing where you take a photograph and then when you look at it afterwards, there's a ghost in the background. I worry about that a lot. Hands down, least favourite kind of ghost. My favourite kind of ghost, thank you for asking, is the kind that are only visible from the knees up because the floor level has changed since they died. It's if I'm going to be haunted, I'd also like to learn about local topography. I've never seen a ghost, but I know what I like. I studied philosophy at university. I did philosophy and religious studies, so the job hunt was really good fun. I think the problem is that people think philosophy is not a very practical subject, but it's okay, I've got a plan. I've gone back to university, and I'm doing a PhD in medieval studies. So I think that's going to pad out my CV. But I have been thinking about career paths I might want to follow. I've been thinking about becoming a nun, but I don't want to be controversial, but I think that nuns have really gone downhill since the 13th century. I'm into the kinds of nuns that would like have mystical visions of Christ, like levitate every time they took the Eucharist, just like that kind of thing. But nowadays it seems like nuns have spend a disproportionate amount of their time like organising group singing. And not really into that. Like, did Holy Woman of the 12th century, St. Christina the Astonishing, waste time organising group singing? No, she didn't. She resurrected from the dead at her own funeral by floating out of her coffin, and when the townspeople accused her of being demonically possessed, she proved them wrong by lactating the sacred oil of Christ. I really respect that. There are quite a lot of lactation miracles in the biographies of medieval female saints. On an unrelated note, most of the biographies of medieval female saints were written by men. St. Christina's biographer goes into, you could say, an unnecessary amount of detail. He specifies that the miraculous oil could heal wounds, and he also writes genuinely that she used to dip her bread into it for flavour, I guess. I think that's quite good. Like, I think if I could lactate any non-milk substance, I think that would be up there. But I think I would want one of them to do the oil, and then like the other one could do a balsamic or something. I just think it's more sophisticated. I was reading about medieval miracles. It's mostly women that you get these stories about, like not just the lactation, but kind of any supernatural events. And one of the historical theories about why that is that women didn't have a lot of power in the church, like they couldn't be priests or bishops. So these supernatural occurrences were a way that they could assert their authority. And I was quite upset when I read that, because like I consider myself a feminist. But are you telling me that if we hadn't pushed so hard for the votes, we would still be able to levitate? I just feel like we've made poor choices there. I actually think the most difficult part of job hunting is, in a job interview, how many follow-up questions is it acceptable for me to ask to clarify the narrative parameters of the hypothetical scenarios they give you? Because I don't know if you know the kind of scenarios that I mean, but it will be something like, a customer is verbally abusing you, what do you do? And the answer is, I accept the exploitation of my labour under capitalism. That's what I like to say. But I tend to find that the world building in those scenarios isn't as vivid as I would like. Like, I was recently in a job interview, and one of the questions was, a customer falls down the stairs and dislocates her leg, and it's not typically where the laugh goes. In that just take it seriously. So if a customer falls down the stairs and dislocates her leg, and she doesn't speak any English, what do you do? And I was like, well, firstly, what languages does she speak? Because I have an A-level in French, GCSE in German, and a good reading knowledge of ecclesiastical Latin. Are any of those going to help me? And I find that I treat those scenarios like the world's most mundane game of Dungeons and Dragons. Because I was also sort of thinking, like, how do I know that her leg is dislocated? Like, have I diagnosed that on site? Because if I have, then the fictional version of me in this scenario has superior medical knowledge to the real version of me, which is good news for my employability. But it does also change my answer. In that case, my answer is that I use my superior medical knowledge to reset the woman's leg myself, and the townspeople reward me with a sack of gold. And the interviewer was like, no. The correct answer is that you accept the exploitation of your labour under capitalism.
Catriona Dowden. Catriona was an amazing set. Had a great time with that. It was loads of fun. So I think what we all really like to know is what exactly is involved in a Radio 4 themed birthday party.
It was mostly kind of panel show based. So if you
Okay.
look, it was sort of imposing that all of my friends had to be guests on like I'm sorry, I haven't a clue,
Yeah.
or just a minute. We had kind of all of the panel games up on a big whiteboard, and then I was obviously adjudicating
Yes.
who won all of the panel games. But most of my friends had not listened to any of the Radio 4 comedy that I was referencing, so it was just kind of, it was quite a hostage situation in retrospect.
I mean, if you are the birthday prince, I think you're allowed to dictate your
Yeah.
own fun, right? So I think that's perfectly reasonable. How old were you when you were having these birthday party or birthday parties plural?
Yeah, plural. I think it was sort of 15, 16 kind of a time. That was like the
Okay.
peak of my Radio 4 years.
That's interesting. So, tell me a bit more about you as a teenager. So, like, what's leading you down this path of like extremely premature middle age?
I think it was just, I don't know, I think just sort of listening into what my parents would listen to. My parents would listen to a lot of like Just a Minute and Radio 4, and then for some reason it just really spoke to me in a way that it shouldn't have for the age demographic. And I think in general I was quite a sort of elderly teenager. I was not going
Yes.
to parties except for Radio 4 themed
The parties. Yeah, yeah.
parties.
Well, this
Yeah.
is interesting. So, I mean, something like a teenagehood is, you know, I think the time when you're sort of starting to kind of like properly find yourself and the adult that you're going to become. And it sounds like your adult was already a sort of very prematurely mature adult. But also the kind of Radio 4 stuff that you're talking about there are things that rely on wit and cleverness. And that is how status is conveyed within those environments. Like, without wishing to, you know, psychoanalyze you too much, was this part of a sort of a teenage grasping for, you know, a status and identity that is based on intelligence, which is, you know, I'm not trying to flatter you here, a field in which I feel that you excel and probably excelled as a teenager, rather than your ability to, I don't know, smoke 20 cigarettes at once while also wearing 5 leather jackets and partying very hard on the back of a motorcycle. Like, is it your way of finding another way of being cool and important as a teenager?
Yeah, I think definitely I was a little bit reclusive, and I think didn't feel the most kind of socially competent, maybe. So I guess, yeah, it's something you can kind of find value in outside of maybe what other sort of teenagers are doing. But then also I had quite a nerdy friendship group. So like there was a few of us that were all like maybe that did carry currency within that little insular social group.
I mean, you strike me as somebody that would have, you know, where that, like, that you would have a small, tight-knit social group of people with whom that really did carry some water and have cachet. Yeah. So, I mean, like, I mean, you're quite a quiet person, I think, on and off stage. I think that's, I mean, my sample of your company is quite limited and certainly not statistically valid. But, like, is that wrong? You are quite introverted and quiet, or?
Yeah, I think I'm like quite reserved. I think I often get sort of maybe misread as being like very shy, which I don't necessarily think I am, because I wouldn't say I'm kind of nervous or kind of hesitant in social situations, but definitely I feel like I don't necessarily, I'm not a gregarious person. I'm not
Yeah.
kind of going out of my way to be really out there, and I think that's sort of true on and off stage. Although I always think I'm being a lot chattier than I am being. I've definitely been in situations where I think I've been like incredibly effusive. And then afterwards, someone will sort of be like, "Oh, like, does Catriona not like me?" Or, you know, that kind of.
It's interesting. So, I mean, I think this comes across as well with your sort of very calm stage presence. So, like, I don't think of you as being like a nervous performer at all, but you're certainly like very calm and very collected. I mean, that kind of brings me towards kind of the next question, really. So, like, particularly about sort of the graphs and that kind of whole segment. So, I mean, like, anyone who wants to see the graphs themselves, obviously, you can go to patreon.com/Quantum Leopard, where we post videos of live shows. Rates start at £1 per show, and we only charge a new live show video comes out, etc., etc., right? But you have a lovely little moment in this bit when you're unfolding the graphs that is just absolute dead silence. And you just say, like, to the soundtrack of, like, unfolding paper, right? And you say, keep that going, which I think that absolutely crystallizes you as a performer, because you really play into that low energy and the quietness and the silences, and not in like an anti-comedy way, and not in a way that feels studied or forced. And like, it's not a power play when you do it, right? You're not using a silence to then create pressure of speech and manipulating people with it. And I find it fascinating because it is almost the exact opposite of what I do, which is generate the energy, bring the show to the audience, make it big and loud, right? And like, I suppose I'm interested in knowing, you know, is this a description of your comedic style rather than just your personality that you recognise? And I would also know, you know, where it comes from as an approach, and like, is this something that you've always done? Has it evolved over time? Was there a time where you went for different energy levels as a performer, or have you always been this way since you first started?
I think I was always very deadpan, and shockingly, I think if anything, like I've become higher energy over time.
Okay, all right, fine. I like, look, in the nicest possible way, with the greatest respect. Like, how? Right? What were you?
I guess just like there's some warmth, maybe a tiny bit more warmth than there used to be. Because I think I've
Okay.
watched some videos of when I haven't filmed loads of my stuff, but whenever I watch like my first few gigs, it's so cold. Like I'm just giving absolutely nothing.
Mm,
And I think maybe that is kind of nerves, maybe sort of holding back from connecting with the audience a bit.
yeah.
But I think now I have a bit more fun with the sort of deadpanness, which is maybe also where the kind of keep that going type
Yes.
comment kind of falls, where it's sort of I'm aware that I'm creating a slightly awkward situation, or I'm creating a slightly uncomfortable, potentially uncomfortable silence or sort of lull. And so it's quite fun to sort of acknowledge that. And I think it puts people at ease when they realize that you know that you're
Yes.
an atypical energy on stage.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, self-awareness is like a huge thing, right? An audience that is seeing somebody that is not self-aware is immediately distrustful, because if they don't know that, what else do they not know, right? Like, because nobody told them
Yeah.
this about themselves, right? And being able to comment on that, I think, and doing that in a way that is self-aware without being self-conscious is a mark of a really excellent performer, or at the very least a very promising performer, irrespective of, who they are and what they're doing, which I think is really, really good. I mean, I absolutely see where you're coming from with the sort of the planning the night out, and you rendering that you rendering such enjoyment from that. Where does this? I mean, that to me is somebody who really enjoys being in control more than they enjoy spontaneity. And where does that come from? Is that something that you know about yourself, or?
Yeah, I don't know really. I think I definitely don't like the feeling of just being kind of. I don't like improv in any sphere of life.
Okay.
Like on or off stage, because I think that's also how I prepare my sets. Is I like to know exactly what I'm going to say and exactly what
Mm.
order everything's going to be in. I very much like don't write on stage, and I think I feel similarly, kind of in every way. Um, I sort of like wrote about it a little bit in my last kind of Edinburgh show of just sort
Mm-mm.
of, yeah, being unable to just sort of let things play out, or kind of through the lens of the dancing plague, obviously. That I don't like dancing because dancing feels very kind of improvised and out of control, and you're
Mm.
having to make all these decisions about what you're going to do, physically. And so, yeah, I don't know exactly where it's come from, but I think it's very wide-ranging and kind of permeates everything that I do.
I find it interesting. I mean, like, your go-to explanations for this would be, a life that was, or an upbringing that was particularly chaotic, or
No.
perhaps no, fair enough, or a particular type of neurodivergence that prods you down that path, or
Mm,
something like that, or growing up in an extremely ordered environment and that appealing to you, and you feeling safe and held as a result, and not
mm.
feeling sort of temperamentally disposed to move away from that. Interesting, interesting. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel definitely potentially neurodivergent, but
Mhm.
I feel like I do not have the time or resources to investigate that at present. So,
Well, I mean, the internet will diagnose you for free. I think that's what I've
yeah,
discovered. And if people like you enough, they will try and they'll see positive traits of their own in you and try and
yes,
recruit you to their particular brain flavour. This has
and
certainly
they
been my
do.
experience by
Yes.
proxy. Yeah, absolutely right. I'm very flattered by the number of things that people think I am because they like that about themselves and want to project that on me. And I'm like, that's adorable, but here's a list of diagnostic reasons why not. But that's it's very sweet of them. The PhD in medieval history. So I think this is interesting.
Yes.
So like, I want to know like what got you into nuns in the first place.
So I think mostly being raised Catholic and
Okay.
just being curious about what was going on. Because I studied philosophy and theology
Mm-hmm.
at university as an undergraduate, and a lot of that was because I was kind of going through my teenage atheist phase, which I feel like is obligatory if you're
Mm-hmm.
brought up religious, and initially wanted to study theology to kind of debunk religion, and then
Yeah.
ended up developing a more nuanced perspective on it and just got really into like started studying a lot of medieval history because if you're a Catholic and you're trying to work out, where has this doctrine come from that isn't in the Bible, usually it's the Middle Ages. So
Yeah.
kind of got into that and then ended up reading all of these female mystics and nuns and kind of a lot of really wacky and surreal historical sources and realized actually it was a lot more interesting to like try and understand them rather than try to debunk them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how I got into that because so many of the stories are just so kind of out there. I think it's
Yeah.
impossible not to get drawn into it once you
I mean,
start reading them.
so if you were to recommend like a good sort of entry level source book for those who are keen to get into their lactating medieval nuns, where's your sort of what would be your entry point that you would recommend?
That's a good question. Um, yeah, I'd say Yanina Ramirez, anything that she's written is great.
Hmm.
Like lots of kind of entry level into women in the Middle Ages. And Christina the Astonishing is my favorite nun, and her life has been translated into English. So I'd recommend just finding a really wacky nun to get invested in.
Okay, lovely.
Mm.
And that's what got you into nuns and how you started with nuns, and you're recommending entry levels to nuns and nun obsession and nun interest. So where is your path of nun obsession taking you next? What is the future of nuns?
Well, what's the future of nuns? Maybe becoming one.
Okay. I mean,
No,
how serious is that? Because I don't know you well enough to know whether you're joking, and
no,
as
no,
you've
no, I'm
described, you're
joking.
quite yeah. Okay, fine. Okay,
But I do fantasize about it. I feel like I read a lot of nun memoirs, like contemporary nun memoirs of
yeah,
people who've left convents and things like that. But I'm not actually religious. I'm just very into nuns and kind of culturally Catholic, so I find
yeah.
it all very alluring. Um, but I'm actually more studying monks at the moment,
Okay,
unfortunately. So
okay.
I've kind of taken a monk tangent in my
Yes,
research.
that's interesting. So what's taking you in the monk direction? Have you run out of nuns? You've been inspired by particular monks? What's the angle?
I was just finding gaps in research, and unfortunately, the gap I
Mm,
found was monks. But I look at visions of the afterlife, and most of them were experienced by men in the period that
that's
I'm looking at.
interesting. So firstly, it's
Mm.
interesting that there are research gaps in the period, and those research gaps are male, right? Like that's quite novel, right?
Mm.
I mean, why? What's the reason for that research gap? I mean, if you have a theory about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, I think it's only in very recent years that people have started becoming more interested in sort of women's history in the Middle
Mm,
Ages.
mm,
But because of that, the last few decades, I feel like obviously there's always more you could find. I'm sure people
yeah,
are doing really amazing work now. But because there's been so much, it's then harder to find like a modern gap that you can fill. Whereas then a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at, maybe it has been looked at a lot, but it hasn't been looked at a lot in a while. And
yes.
so you can come back to it with fresh eyes and sort of,
Yeah.
you know,
Scholarship and interpretation has moved on by a generation and a half, and
yeah,
now it's time for some penetrating doubt and insight. Yeah, got it. Okay, cool.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So is this also? Are you thinking about this with a view to like another Edinburgh show? Are you going to have a monk centric hour?
Yeah, that could be quite fun. I feel like there's maybe only so many medieval religious orders that I can write Edinburgh shows about without it getting a bit samey. But I do really enjoy putting my research into my comedy because firstly, it's just efficient.
Yeah,
Um, but
you're
also
doing
I
the
feel
reading
like
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think the Middle Ages is just kind of an endless well for comedy. Like there's so much kind of surreal and just really bizarre kind of ephemera. But
Uh,
yeah, not no immediate monk show plans. But I feel
yeah.
like never say never
Never
with
say
that.
never. Yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting because I'm very much a fan of a comedian that will come on and they will tell me about something that they know a lot about and I know nothing about. Right? Like
Mm.
I want to feel like I've like, and whether that's something like medieval ecclesiastical history or it's just they've gone off and they've had an experience and now they're coming back and telling me
Yeah.
about that experience. You know what I mean? I want that in my comedians. I want that in my writers. I want that in my filmmakers. I want that in my musicians. I want that in any artist that I encounter. Right? Because I'm
Mm.
already me and I'm doing that pretty well. Right? I want someone to go off and be them and do their thing and come and report back and like show me their findings, right? And like give me that over 10, 20 minutes or maybe an Edinburgh hour, right? And I think that
Yeah.
really is something that I think a lot of performers could benefit from is thinking like, okay, well, what do I know that other people don't? And
Yeah.
how can I bring this across and put my own stamp on it? And yes, I want to see more of that. Cool, lovely. So the olive oil balsamic lactation sequence, I think it's a really interesting development of the character you're building up on stage because you've brought us in with this quiet, somewhat innocent whimsy. You know, there's the sort of the element of the sort of the scholarly blue stocking about you, and then you're adding something in that is like literally saucier to undercut it. And I think it's bits like it's very well timed at being like 2/3 of the way through the set. Like I'm wondering if it's in this position so that it feels like you or indeed the audience have kind of like quote unquote earned it in terms of having a a slightly, again, in inverted commas, sexier bit.
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely think a lot about what order things need to go in to set up
Mm-hmm.
and deconstruct kind of character and expectation. So I've done that bit before. Have you done Fast Fringe at Edinburgh where you do 3 minutes of
I
material?
I did a different Fast Fringe. I did Fast Fringe with Guess Who, and I did 3 minutes of
Mm.
that for children, and that was extremely
Oh,
challenging. I've now started doing kids gigs, and they are absolutely lovely, but it's a very different experience, and I
mm,
suspect it presents very different challenges when I'm doing that to when you're doing a three
mm,
minute, medieval saint centric bit. So, tell me about your
yes.
challenges. What were you thinking with that 3 minutes?
Well, because I did the nun bit, because I hate
Mm,
having to do less than 5 minutes because
yes.
I feel like you think about things in 5 minute blocks. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
5, 7, 10 makes sense, and then three agonizing because you've always got to cut something
Yeah.
that's vital, I think. So I think I just did all of my nun bits, probably the same from that set because it was exactly 3 minutes. And I definitely felt like it worked, but also I did feel much less satisfaction kind of going into that. I would close on the lactation joke.
Yeah.
And I definitely think it loses something when you don't have the build up because I think a lot of
Yeah.
it is subvert like they don't know who I am and they don't know that it's unusual for me to talk about lactation.
Yes. Yes.
So I completely think it matters where in the set it falls.
Yeah. So
And
what's
just kind
your
of
I was going to say, what's your plan if you're structuring a 10-minute set? So, what are the blocks that you're putting in place to build that up, deconstruct things? What's your sort of you're going to a comedy club, you don't really know much about the area, the venue, etc., etc. What's your standard approach to how you're going to structure your 10?
I definitely always try and make the first 2 to 3 minutes kind of character setup.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So maybe the graphs used to be my kind of go-to sort of this is
Yes,
who I am as a person
that
and
that says a lot
comedian.
about you. Yep, yep, yep.
And I think at the moment I'm doing a bit about how I have a weak constitution is usually my setup. So
Okay, yeah, yeah, nice. All
sort
right.
of also something that has that self-awareness aspect to it of I know how I'm coming across to you. And then I feel like you can get more into the meat of it. So I don't worry quite as much about what's in the middle. And then I try and put if I have a punchline that is like the lactation one, or it maybe takes a bit more bringing the audience along with you. Like I've been doing a lot of stuff recently or in my last show about vaginismus and kind of
Yeah,
reproductive
yeah.
health.
Hmm.
And that's quite challenging to drop into a 10 minute or a
Mm,
20 minute
mm,
set. So that generally will sort of be once I've brought everyone along, and
yes.
then maybe there'll be something else at the end that kind of eases everyone out of that.
Yeah, it's quite yes, quite reasonable and appropriate that it's quite a hard bit to squeeze in. You do need to warm up the
Yeah,
audience nicely to it, and then withdraw gently as well. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, lovely. I mean, how is that sort of material going down? Because I imagine that's the kind of stuff which is like, for anybody who recognises that experience directly or indirectly, that's like, oh wow, somebody's talking about this on stage. This is brilliant. And I imagine there's another, comparably sized proportion of the audience that is like not cool with it at all for ways which I think we can all agree are ideologically terrible. But like, how are you finding that? And how's that going down?
Yeah, I do find it really interesting, and it does slightly frustrate me because I do think there's a certain demographic of audience member who maybe just, again, there's too many innuendos, so just
Yeah. That's fine.
ignore that, but who clam up and kind of
Yeah.
don't, just don't want to even be receptive to the idea of it, rather than,
Yes.
I'm not making any jokes that I think are particularly graphic, but I think people just the concept of, oh, you're talking about your body, and this is something that they perceive as like a sort of woman's problem,
Yeah.
and just kind of yeah, just sort of don't want to even engage with it. And I think after a point, maybe it will be good. And I have been trying to think a bit about how to sort of make those people more receptive. But I also think maybe if there's a level in which people might never be receptive, I don't really
Yeah.
care, because I want to talk about it because I find it fun to talk about on stage. And also, definitely, I think the people who really like it really, really like it,
Yes.
and like really connect with it. So I'd rather there just be a small portion of the audience that loves it and feels really represented by it and recognizes what's funny about the experience, than really tone it down for the sake of a few people who would literally never engage with it.
I think that's absolutely the right approach. I think those people are never going to be your fans anyway, and it makes no sense to
Yeah.
chase them. And so much of both enjoying yourself as an artist and also like building a following, getting people to want to come and see you more, is to find a niche and hit it hard, rather than doing something that is going to get a 6 out of 10 laugh out of 90% of the room. Like, I can go to any comedy club in the country and see a bunch of comedians like that all the time. I don't want to book a single one of them, right? And I don't particularly want to come back to those clubs to watch that kind of performance. And I said that as a comedy fan as well as a promoter. Yeah, cool, lovely. If you could say anything to yourself at the age of 18, what would it be?
I think it's very cheesy and kind of
Do
not
it.
very original,
Do
but just
it.
kind of continue with what you're doing now. Like, don't feel like you need to sort of try harder to fit in than you already are, because, the things that are interesting about you will continue to make you interesting.
That's
Um,
lovely and sincere. That's excellent. Fantastic. Okay, wonderful. So, Catriona, that was a lovely set and a lovely chat. If people want to catch up with you and your things, where can they seek you out? What have you got to plug?
So my social media on everything is Catriona Dowden, and I also run a comedy night in Oxford with Undercover Comedy, which is a queer feminist comedy collective.
Lovely stuff, lovely stuff. So, do check those things out. Thanks once again, Catriona. It's been lovely to see you. Bye.
Thank you.
That was the Quantum Leopard podcast. If you want to catch a live show in London, look us up at Linktree /Quantum Leopard to sign up to the mailing list. We will never take advertising because advertising is cultural poison, but from each according to their ability to each according to their need. So if you're enjoying our guests in your ears, but would like them in your eyes as well, we have videos of whole shows up on patreon.com/Quantum Leopard. We only charge when a new live show video comes out. If you enjoyed the show, why not give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice, and or share this episode on the socials. Editing was by Rhys Lawton, who is conventionally attractive and fun at parties. Music was composed and produced by Rooks Production Services at I Am Rooks on the socials. That's Rooks with an E. The Quantum Leopard podcast is distributed and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License, which means you can share it as much as you like, but don't change it or sell it in any way, because I will find out where you live. Kind love, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening.